across the industry, you have startups with only a couple employees that will do it. It's an immediate plug and play into compliance and infrastructure, particularly if they're poised for rapid expansion and growth, all the way up to companies with hundreds of employees. I mean, it would not be uncommon for a company with over 1,000 employees to be on a PEO.
Hi, I'm Gustavo, and I bring you today's topics related to human resources, career management, and business. Welcome to HR Talent and Insiders with me, Gustavo Serbia. Well, Nick, welcome to HR Talent and Insiders. I appreciate very much you accepting the invitation to come and talk. And we're actually going to be talking about professional employer organizations, PEOs, which are actually newer to me. And probably to some of those that are listening and watching us. So I appreciate that you're coming to us. Before we get going into the topic, I always like to start with giving the guest, the floor for a minute or so to introduce himself in this case, and tell us a little bit of who you are and what you do.
Sure, no problem. I appreciate it. Great to be here. I'm Nick Stepanovich, as you said. I've been with ADP now. Going on just past 10 years, maybe. Before that, I spent roughly 6 years in the consulting industry. Most of my time has been working with small and medium-sized business, predominantly on the sales side, but obviously as solutions get larger, as problems get larger, connecting to business goals is a huge component of what we do. So really excited to be here. PEO is something that I spend a lot of time on. I'm very passionate about it. So to introduce you and your listeners to what a PEO might be, particularly why it's so relevant right now, I'm really excited for the opportunity.
Perfect. So we're going to break it down, and I guess we're going to do two parts. The first part is we're going to talk about what PEOs are. And, for those of you that are not familiar with PEOs, if you have heard of companies like Insperity or TriNet or even ADP, these are companies that offer these PEOs. And then after we talk about the PEOs, we're going to talk about PEOs in light of COVID-19, the coronavirus. So let's start with PEO. So we know that PEO starts for Professional Employer Organization. What are these?
So in the most basic terms, it is what people would refer to as a co-employment relationship.
Okay.
So there's some very specific definitions as to what that is. Some of it's tied to some very specific language that was put forward by the IRS as far as defining what that means. But in very, very basic language, if you own a business, you are free to continue to run the day-to-day of your operation. You hire people, you let people go, you're responsible for the specialty of your skill sets, right? Producing a high-quality product, a service. Day-to-day, it's your operation. You also retain what I would consider all of the advantages of being a business owner. So tax credits, how you get paid, how you manage your personal wealth or assets, none of that gets changed. You still own your company. There's a mechanism, though, where you're able to move the client, if you will, or the company's employees under a federal ID. So in this circumstance, you would take a company's employees, the ownership structure, et cetera, you would move them under an ADP federal ID. And this is where the co-employment component comes into play. What that allows us to do is to take advantage of some spend leverage when it comes to major medical insurance. It shifts tremendous liability when it comes to compliance, workers' comp, and I can give you more details, but in broad strokes, that's what it is.
So, and how is it different from outsourcing?
Sure. So, the nice thing about, I'm working for ADP, right? I mean, I specialize currently in PEO, but I can maybe speak to from my background, but also what we're offering. So there's outsourcing as people understand it, which is more of a software as a service experience. You would partner with a vendor, you would access their software through the internet, and you would do things like document management or payroll outsourcing like we do, or other services. And that's outsourcing, but in really a SaaS model.
Got it.
You can build on that SaaS model and get into more of a shared service, or what people might be familiar with, a managed service. And that's where your vendor or partner actually uses their people and their technology to do something for you. So Some people have experience with managed IT or managed print. In our world, we might do managed HR or managed benefits administration, where you're going to use our technology and our people.
Mm-hmm.
Specifically to a PEO, though, it's a co-employment experience. So somebody at the client has to still own being the face of HR. Somebody has to administer performance reviews. We work through that person and with them in partnership, but it's not what you would consider like a lift and shift style of outsourcing that people might think that it is.
Oh, I see. Okay. So from a PEO standpoint, you can cover the entire employee life cycle, right? From recruitment. What would it look like on the recruitment front?
Sure. And, I'm going to speak a little generically about PEO, maybe a little bit more specifically about what we do at ADP. There's hundreds of PEOs out there,
Yeah.
right? I can't speak for all of them.
Yep.
What I would say is that there was a certification process put forward by the IRS several years ago. And what it does is it elevates the expectations and the standards for service providers like ours. It protects the quality of service. It also protects our clients so we don't get overextended.
Yeah.
Guarantees. So the certification process is very important. So I'm speaking from the perspective of a certified PEO as sort of maybe a asterisk for future comments.
Yeah.
But recruiting can be, like a lot of things within a PEO, very customized to what your organization is looking for. So at its most basic level, you can use our technology to run your recruiting process, start to finish. Right? Think of our technology as guardrails, or even better, as train rails, where you put the train right on the rails and really control the process.
Yes.
So our technology can help provide workflows. So there's a quality, consistent experience, high quality recruiting experience. You could then take advantage of some of the expertise that we bring to bear, work with your HR business partner, some of our subject matter experts, and really start to peel back what does good recruiting look like? So what's your job description? Is it even written in a way to be relevant to your ideal employee? What's the application experience as far as speed to hire, communication coming in and out? What are high quality interview questions, non-compliant interview questions you should be careful of? And that's really where the subject matter expertise as well as the protection comes into play. And some organizations like ours can even offer a full, almost outsourced contingency-based recruiting service where you can say, bring me so many people that meet these requirements, and then we'll actually have our recruiters do the work, although that's usually more specialized in nature. That middle bucket is where we spend most of our time.
So you touched upon the applicant tracking system. So in essence, I in the case of ADP, I can have access to the ADP platform, let's say Workforce Now as my human capital management, and use it for the entire experience. So I don't have to necessarily go and buy or access my own. I can just get ADP as a partner, and then ADP can support the services around the entire employee life cycle. We touched upon recruiting, hiring and onboarding, of course, through the technology we can do that. What about things like workers' compensation, risk, and safety? I imagine that's probably one of the primary reasons why some employers opt to go the PEO route.
Sure. It's a significant component of our value proposition.
Yeah.
So through that mechanism, if you will, where you move employees under our federal ID, that now enables us to put those employees on our workers' comp program.
Oh, okay.
And that's the language we use is shift in liability, right? So if you're going to get workers' compensation through us, first of all, there's the administration of workers' comp. In a state like Ohio, where I live, you have to work through a state bureau. Most states, it's another broker, another insurance carrier, it's another bill to reconcile. So the administration of it, we take care of. So that in and of itself is a reduction in work, a reduction of risk. Yeah. But at the same time, if you're going to have our workers' comp, we don't want our workers' comp to get out of control either. So the amount of support that we're going to provide, education, proactive training, everything on risk and safety, accidents and injuries, things as basic as lockout, tagout on the training side, as sophisticated as elevating your company through to have a higher culture of safety awareness, and everything in between to really mitigate the risk on the front end. Because again, we have skin in the game through that co-employment experience.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that co-employment is significant, particularly when you would consider to partner with a large organization, like in this case, ADP, because you guys can bring a lot of benefits that perhaps a smaller company that may still be able to offer some of those services, maybe on an outsourcing basis, can do, but they don't have the leverage, right? And this is where now, if we jump not only into risk management and workers' comp, but if we talk about benefits, I can have a company with, maybe 5, 10 employees, but I can have access to a really quality healthcare plan that is going to be cost efficient for my employees and for me as an employer. Is that the case?
Yes, it is actually. And leverage was a good word for that. And I think about where people want to work, right? I work for a very large company. I like it. It's a great employment experience for me.
Yeah.
The size provides me certain opportunities, but I like working for a large company. Some people prefer going to large universities. Some people like going to small colleges, right? Some people live in small towns, big cities. Yep. Each their own. And the same at the employment experience level. Some people like working for big companies, and with that comes certain access to perks or benefits. Some people really like working for small businesses.
Yeah.
And that's great. You need small business, right? So there's a culture, there's a uniqueness to working for small business, but through the PEO as an employer, you now can provide some of that large company experience without losing your small business culture. I can be the 30 employee manufacturer, the 70 employee plumbing company, the 120 employee accounting firm in 6 states, but I can offer the variety of benefits, the employment experience when it comes to support and service and questions and advocacy that I frankly get working for a very, very large organization. You can sort of, have your cake and eat it too, for lack of a better phrase. You can work for the small company and feel that community draw of a small company and still have big company benefit.
Yeah, I can imagine a lot of the small businesses out there that are trying to compete for talent. And, here they have an opportunity now with a PEO to actually be competitive versus some of the larger organizations out there that are maybe more attractive because they have more resources to offer. When you think of the employer size, what is the typical size of the employers that tend to go for PEOs from your experience?
Sure. So across the industry, you have startups with only a couple employees that will do it. It's an immediate plug and play into compliance and infrastructure, particularly if they're poised for rapid expansion and growth, all the way up to companies with hundreds of employees. It would not be uncommon for a company with over 1,000 employees to be on a PEO. Now, the reasons that a 1,200 employee company and a 5 employee company might make that decision are different. But in my experience, probably the majority of the newer clients I work with are somewhere in the 30 to 130 employee range is typically the bulk.
Yep.
But if you think about it, if you think about the changes that take place from a compliance perspective between 25, 50, 100 employees, if you think about the big tipping point at 50 going back and forth as far as the Affordable Care Act is concerned, there's just, if you're 300 versus 500, sure, I can make an argument that's a very similar company. But if you're going to go from 30 to 70 to 100, you can go through some very, very significant changes in your requirements and expectations. Yeah.
Yeah, I have to admit, I was not familiar with PEOs until about 2 to 3 years ago that I started helping a startup. And it was only the founder, and she wanted to bring 2 employees on board, and she wanted to create a great experience, right? But these employees that were working somewhere else, they were like, listen, I want to jump the wagon with you, but I need benefits. I need pay. What can you offer? And I get the passion that you have, but I also need to pay the bills. And we reached out to a couple of PEOs, and that's how I became familiar with this model. And, even in the experiences that I've had, as I reflect in some of the companies, but primarily the last company that I was with, this could have been a good consideration to have, particularly when we want to be much more competitive in terms of our benefits, because you want to be a better employer. And, benefits in particular, if pricing is determined by your user population, right? Your experience, now you have potentially the risk of being very expensive in terms of those benefits, and could be cost prohibitive for the employer, and then it would be cost prohibitive for the employee. So I can see the benefit, all around. But talk to me now in the context of COVID, how has there new trends resurfaced that have made PEOs more attractive because of COVID?
Sure. I would say that in our perspective, right, at ADP with our PEO, and by the way, if I didn't say so before, PEO, right, that's the industry. The branded name of our PEO is Total Source. So if I ever say Total Source by accident, that's our branded name.
Got it.
Sure. What we do at its core, that co-employment experience, that shift of liability, the ability to provide expertise, that hasn't changed. That's always been a solid component of what our PEO offers. But the reasons companies might be looking to partner for a PEO may be evolving, and in some instances have evolved because of COVID. So a really great example would just be the idea of business resiliency. That is a very, very large driver of the conversations we're having right now.
So here I am trying to figure out COVID. I'm a small employer, and I happen to have, a few dozen employees, but I happen to be in different states. Would a PEO then help me, or how would a PEO then help me navigate COVID in terms of policies, in terms of risk management, protocols that I need to follow, et cetera?
Sure. Yeah. So I'll take a step back a little and kind of lead into the details of some of those specifics.
Yep.
So think about some of the things that a PEO does by definition, right? There's that shift of liability. So right out of the gate, by the definition of being on a PEO, you have some protection.
Yeah.
Right. So if something were to happen in your organization, a larger entity like ours with a tremendous amount of resources and expertise is there to support you. And that could be as basic as risk and safety stuff, slip and falls, people getting hurt. It could be as sensitive as something as a HR violation, right? I was not treated fairly at work. There was some hiring practices that were not compliant. So any of those things, we're going to be involved in helping you stay compliant. And then if something happens at your organization, we're also going to be there to support you and have the rights of both the employee and the employer in mind. So that's an inherent component of a PEO.
Yeah.
So then look at it through the lens of COVID, where businesses were turned upside down. I work for a very, very large company. We have endless contingency plans, right? So when a pandemic was starting to make its way, right, we had plans in place. We did some particularly amazing things as far as taking care of our employees, supporting a virtual and work from home environment. I never felt any disconnect from my company. I had technological resources, people resources. Just as an organization, ADP was really there to help me continue to be successful. Again, very large company, lots of resources.
Yeah.
So small business who don't have the resources, who don't have the infrastructure and have survived this are thinking, wow, I need to be more resilient. I need to protect my revenue streams, right? I need to put infrastructure in place to make sure that I can survive whatever the next occurrence is. I need to look at things like compliance, employee experience. Like these are front of mind for businesses, and the PEO is in a unique position to just literally plug in infrastructure for you.
Yeah.
Provide the compliance support, right? And then specifically, as far as multiple states, is think about the states, right? Like I'm in Ohio. We've had the majority of our industries open for several weeks now.
Yeah.
You know, just the north of me in Michigan, a lot of their industries are currently not open. And I'm sure as people watch this video over time, the protocols will be very, very different. So
Correct.
if you're in multiple states, what's open, what's not open, what's allowed, what's not allowed, what are the protocol are very different. Trying to interpret them is very complicated. Right. So when you can just call one person and say help, and we can show up through ADP Total Source and say, what's going on? How can we help? Here's best practice. Here's how we can support you. It's a tremendous relief to clients that they can just focus on their people and their business and not worry about that.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I can see how it is an attractive proposition and why there's so many out there. I was reading on a website, and that there's dozens and dozens of PEOs of different sizes in this space, and I can see why. From a startup to a small organization that is trying to figure out how to move forward, I can tap into a huge resource that can provide me an infrastructure that allows me to continue to operate or start operating without having to worry, because the knowledge is there. The policies and procedures are also available. Plus, that risk piece is definitely very attractive when it comes to potential exposure to liability. So let's take a scenario. So let's say, for example, I have a company. I have 15 employees. I'm the CEO, and an employee comes to me. I'm partnered with Total Source, and an employee calls me and says, "Listen, I'm being harassed by a manager."
Sure.
What do I do at that moment? I've never done it, right? I'm the CEO of the company, but I'm not dealing with that. I'm dealing with other things. What can I do?
Yeah, so a lot of it depends on the size of the organization. So you're the CEO of a small company, they come right to you. If you were a 60-employee company, there might be a manager or HR person between
Correct.
you, sure. Ultimately, it's your responsibility as the owner of the company.
Yep.
So what I would recommend is the first thing you would do is to call us, right? Call your partner here who is here to help you and to protect you. You get assigned resources, whether it's your HR business partner who is that strong HR partner who is really sort of there with you on the planning, right? Ground level kind of HR support. And then the subject matter experts that we have available at our disposal. So first thing is really call us. Tell us what happened. Let us get involved. It could be a situation where you just need coaching on the conversation. It could be a situation where you need advice. It could be something very serious, and we might have to get involved in an investigation on your behalf if that's what it takes, because it's a delicate balance. You definitely want to take care of the rights of the employee. It's the decent thing to do. Plus, it's part of your employer brand.
Yeah. At
the same time, you're an employer, and you have rights, and somebody needs to look out for what's fair for you. So when we come in, sure, we're your service provider. You're paying us, if you will, but we're going to come on as sort of a interested third party is maybe a weird way to say it.
Yeah.
We want to make sure that what's policy, what's procedure, what's law, what's rights, right? What's the state say? What does the government say? What's been communicated? What are expectations? And like I said, anything from coaching to a full-blown investigation could take place, so we can help you make sure that you do right by both you and the employee.
Yeah, I mean, now that you are basically in a co-employment relationship, you also have a vested interest as the company to protect yourself. Sure. I can see that. Listen, as I said, this was all new to me, but I can see now, especially under COVID, I'm a small business. I think you and I talked when we were prepping in terms of PPP loans. Do you help these organizations to understand the PPP loans, and do you walk them through that process? What would that look like under Total Source?
Yeah, so with COVID especially, there's been a lot of unique circumstances pop up. Some of them very COVID specific, like PPP. Some of them are a little bit more broadly, again, resiliency based. So the kinds of things that companies need to have in place so they weren't freaked out over when 9/11 happened and the economy went sideways, when the housing market blew up, right? There was the banking crisis. There was all the confusion around the Affordable Care Act. Now we have this pandemic, right? There's always market volatility. Some of it is more severe than others. So some of what we're doing is just helping people put processes and procedures, communication strategies, infrastructure in place to protect them regardless of the next event. So that's part of the answer. Specifically to COVID, sure, things like PPP loans, like working, whether it's through trusted advisors, financial advisors, tremendous amount of partnering with the CPA community right now to help make sure that the PPP loans the documentation is accurate, that they're getting on our end as far as payroll data is concerned. What banks are they going to? We partner with a lot of banks, especially locally. So through partnership, as well as our reporting, the information we provide, the expertise we provide, even things like workforce planning. I'm going to bring people back. So how much of my money am I spending on labor? How much am I not? I would say one of the biggest areas that people are leaning on us for right now is the data we have, which is helping with this to work.
Yeah.
So what I mean by that is think about an organization that had a business plan, right? They put it in a fancy notebook. They shared it with their board. They shared it with their company. They worked on it all Q4 of 2019. They're running with it in January. COVID comes along and rips it up.
Yep.
And now they're returning to work and they're thinking, what does good look like this year? Where's the company going? What are we going to achieve? Have we changed our goals? Have we not? Well, if you're going to change the goals in any possible way, in most companies, you're only as good as your people to an extent.
Yeah.
So if I'm going to move the goalpost, well, then how do I redefine what good looks like in my organization and then cascade that down all the way through the employee? How do I recalibrate my process, my standards, my expectations, and quickly get that communicated, build processes around it, build an accountability structure around it so we can start moving forward? That's a huge part of what we're doing right now, is just helping people recalibrate their workforce around what good looks like so they can quickly move their companies forward and find success.
Yeah. Yeah. One thing that obviously we won't cover here, but that concept of data, I certainly know that ADP has access to a lot of data because of the years that they've been in the business and because of their size. And, I do know that in the last job that I had, one of the things that I was looking at was the analytics piece from ADP. We never deployed it, but the amount of information that you guys have available, specifically data that can influence how a company operates, is absolutely amazing. But when it comes to these small organizations, that access to data, I think, becomes extremely valuable because they need a point of comparison. They need a point of seeing what others might be doing or might be experiencing in order to determine. So, I can see the value. Certainly, larger organizations are probably not necessarily considering PEOs, but I wanted to give, the audience the opportunity to understand them because, frankly, I didn't know about them until 3 years ago. And the total value that it can bring depending on the circumstances. If you're a startup, if you're a small organization, if you are across states, if you don't have an infrastructure and you want to improve your employee experience, you may want to check out some of these PEOs out there as a potential. Nick, just to close, is there anything else that you want to talk about that we haven't discussed already as we close the episode?
I would say that I understand. I have the privilege of speaking to at least a business owner a day, probably. And I support a team that covers the majority of Ohio. I'm part of a great team here across the Midwest. We share a lot of information, and I have access to a lot of the concerns that business owners have. And I get where they're coming from, right? It's frustrating. You don't know where to turn.
Yeah.
The government is saying one thing, employees are saying another. It's very, very complicated.
Yeah.
What I would say is that there is help out there. There are organizations like ours that can help. Sometimes there's a process you have to go through to figure out if it's a good fit. But there are these methods out there. You don't have to go it alone. People have turned to CPAs, they've turned to financial advisors, they've turned to bankers. I worked for a consulting company for years. This is another avenue companies definitely need to explore when they're thinking about how can I make my company stronger and more resilient, and how can I quickly move my company forward, really through their people. Because at the end of the day, the things that existed pre-COVID, the frustrations about being an employer of choice, connecting with your people, keeping them engaged, training them, learning them, those frustrations and problems didn't miraculously go away because we hit pause on the economy.
Yeah.
Right? If anything, they were exacerbated because now you're going to have conflicts between people that want to come back to the office and those that don't, people who have become accustomed to working from home and people who can't. There's just a tremendous amount of opportunity for companies to really seize upon it and really move their organization forward in a great way.
Yeah.
And companies like ours exist with our expertise and our data to help if people will take the meeting and have a conversation.
Yeah, I have to admit that the amount of information can be overwhelming. If you're trying to run a business and you're trying to understand how to operate, and then some of it because of the misinformation, good, bad, or indifferent that exists, it can be overwhelming for a company. And if they're truly looking at it from an employee experience standpoint, from improving that worker experience, particularly because of the shift in what the culture might look like now that some people are remote, and that debate of do I go, do I stay home, what do I do? I could see the value of reaching out to an organization and saying, okay, can you help me? What are my options, and how can I get over this hump? And unfortunately, it doesn't look like it's going to be short-lived. I mean, it's going to be a few more months of this. I mean, I'm certainly optimistic that it will go away. I think it will. It's a matter of when, not necessarily if. But I can see employers, because myself, when I was the head of HR, I was overwhelmed with just dealing with 28 different states in that case. How do we operate? And that was ongoing. So smaller organizations that are trying to figure it out, particularly if they don't have dedicated HR folks or people that know about this, probably benefit from reaching out to organizations like ADP Total Source, or some of the others out there, like I said, Insperity, TriNet, and you can Google this and you will find tons of them. So, Nick, I appreciate very much your time, and I appreciate the education on PEOs. Hopefully people will find it beneficial. You can obviously find Nick on LinkedIn, and he's available there. And certainly he's available to offer your services, his services through ADP if you desire. But thank you very much for coming out, and I appreciate it.
Sure. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
No problem. Take care.